I've always believed in loyalty, in justice. It's the way I was raised. Good people deserve good things, and bad people, well, they should face the consequences. I never thought I'd end up questioning these beliefs in my own marriage. Wendy and I have been together for over a decade. We've built a life, a family, and countless memories. She's always been my rock, my best friend. I trusted her completely. We've had our share of ups and downs like any couple, but I never doubted that we were solid, that we'd be together until the end. But you know, life has a way of testing the things you hold dearest. My biggest fear has always been losing Wendy, but I never truly believed it could happen. I never saw myself as the kind of guy who'd end up in that situation. I mean, Wendy would never betray me, right? She was too good, too loyal, we were too strong. Yet lately, something's been off. It's hard to put into words. Little things, really. A certain distance, a distraction that wasn't there before. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. After all, Wendy and I had a history, a bond that couldn't be shaken by something as trivial as a few strange moments. But that doubt, it started creeping in. It's the kind of doubt you don't want to acknowledge, because once you do, there's no turning back. And I couldn't shake the feeling that maybe, just maybe, everything I believed in was about to be tested in a way I never expected. For years, I thought I had it all, a loving wife, a stable home, and a future that seemed bright and secure. Wendy and I, we were that couple everyone else looked up to. We had our routines, our shared jokes, and the kind of bond that made life feel, well, perfect. We'd sit together in the evenings, talking about our day, our plans, our dreams. I was sure we were on the same page, both committed to building this life we had worked so hard for. I'd catch her smiling at me across the room, and I'd think, this is it. This is what happiness looks like. I was living the dream I'd always wanted. But looking back now, I wonder if maybe I was a little too comfortable, too sure of the life we'd built. You see, when you're in it, when you're living that so-called perfect life, you don't notice the small cracks forming. You brush off the little things because, in your mind, everything is exactly as it should be. I thought Wendy felt the same way. It's funny, isn't it? How you can be so sure of something, so certain that nothing could ever come between you and the person you love. I was so wrapped up in the idea of our perfect life that I didn't see what was right in front of me. I didn't see the distance that was slowly growing between us, the subtle shifts in her mood, the way she started to pull away. I guess I was living in a bubble, convinced that our life together was unbreakable. But the truth is, even the most perfect life can have flaws. And sometimes, those flaws are the beginning of something you never saw coming. It all started with the little things I told myself were nothing to worry about. Wendy started working late more often, saying she had extra responsibilities since her promotion. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, we all have busy periods, right? But then there was the way she started getting ready for work. She used to just throw on whatever was comfortable, but suddenly she was putting in extra effort. New clothes, more makeup. I told myself she was just adjusting to her new role, wanting to make a good impression. But deep down, something didn't sit right. Then the conversations changed. We used to talk about everything, every little detail of our day. But now she was distant, distracted, like she was somewhere else, even when she was sitting right next to me. I'd ask her how her day was, and she'd give me these short, vague answers, like she couldn't be bothered to go into detail anymore. The woman who used to share every thought with me was now keeping things to herself. And it hurt, you know? It was like I was slowly being shut out of her life. But the real turning point was the nights. We always made time for each other, even if it was just a few minutes before bed. But suddenly, she was too tired, too stressed, too busy. She'd come home, say a few words, and go straight to sleep. And I was left there, lying awake, wondering what had changed. I'd lie there in the dark, my mind racing, trying to convince myself that it was all in my head. But the more I tried to ignore it, the louder that little voice inside me got. Something was wrong. I could feel it. One night, we had a fight. Nothing major, just one of those silly arguments that usually blow over. But this time, it didn't. She blew up at me, completely out of the blue, over something so trivial I can't even remember what it was. And the way she looked at me, it wasn't just anger, it was like there was something deeper, something darker behind her eyes. That was when I realized this wasn't just about stress or work. There was something else going on, something she wasn't telling me. But I was still in denial. I didn't want to believe that the woman I loved, the woman I trusted more than anyone, could be hiding something from me. I kept telling myself that it was just a rough patch, that we'd get through it, like we always did. But the truth was staring me in the face, and I was too scared to see it. And then there was the day she didn't come home. She called me late, saying she had to stay at work for a project that needed to be finished by morning. But her voice, it was off. I can't explain it, but it was like she was trying too hard to sound normal. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But as I sat there alone in our living room, I felt this cold wave of fear wash over me. For the first time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that maybe, just maybe, my worst fears were about to become reality. Those cracks I'd been trying so hard to ignore were now impossible to hide from. Our perfect life was crumbling right in front of me, and I felt powerless to stop it. After that night, everything changed. The doubt that had been gnawing at me, the fear I'd been trying so hard to push aside, it all came rushing to the surface. I started noticing things, small, almost insignificant details that suddenly seemed like flashing red lights. Wendy was more distant than ever, and the excuses for her late nights started piling up. "Work's just crazy right now," she'd say, or "I'm helping out a colleague with a big project." But the more she said it, the less I believed it. I couldn't help myself. I started paying closer attention. I'd notice how she'd smile at her phone, how she'd quickly swipe away messages when I walked into the room. It wasn't like her to be secretive, and it made my stomach churn. One day, I saw her leave the house with a nervous energy I hadn't seen before. She said she was going to meet some friends from work, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything in my head: the late nights, the distant conversations, the sudden changes in her behavior. It was like a puzzle with too many pieces missing, and I was desperate to find out what those pieces were. I started questioning everything, every excuse, every story, every little detail that didn't quite add up. I knew I was spiraling, but I couldn't stop. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that something was happening behind my back. I started checking her phone when she wasn't looking, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain what was going on. But she was careful, too careful. There was nothing obvious, nothing I could confront her with. And that only made my suspicions grow. I began to see her differently. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, was suddenly a stranger to me. I'd watch her, trying to decipher every word, every look, every action. Was she lying? Was she hiding something? My mind was racing, jumping to conclusions, imagining scenarios that made my heart pound with fear and anger. One day, I decided to follow her. I hated myself for it, but I had to know. She said she was meeting a friend for lunch, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. I trailed her car at a distance, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like a detective in my own life. I kept telling myself that I was overreacting, that I was going to find out it was nothing, and I'd feel ridiculous for even thinking this way. But when she pulled into a parking lot, and I saw her get out of the car with a man I didn't recognize, my heart stopped. I watched as they walked into a cafe together, laughing, talking closely. My mind went blank, and for a moment, I couldn't move. This was it. This was the confirmation I'd been dreading. My worst fears were standing right in front of me. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the wheel. I wanted to scream, to confront her, to demand answers, but I couldn't. I didn't even know who that man was, what their relationship was. But seeing them together, seeing her smile at him the way she used to smile at me, it broke something inside me. My suspicions had become my reality, and I was drowning in it. The trust we had, the love I believed in, it was all unraveling, and I was left wondering how much of our life together had been a lie. I knew I had to confront her, but I was terrified of what I'd find out. I was on the edge, teetering between disbelief and the painful truth I was beginning to accept, that my wife, my Wendy, might have betrayed me in the worst possible way. I couldn't live with the doubt anymore. It was eating me alive, gnawing away at every shred of peace I had left. I knew I had to confront her, to get the truth out in the open, no matter how much it would hurt. So one night, after dinner, I decided it was time. We were sitting in the living room, the air thick with tension. Wendy was scrolling through her phone, barely acknowledging my presence, and I felt this surge of anger and pain rise up in me. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Wendy," I said, my voice trembling, despite my best efforts to stay calm. "We need to talk." She looked up, surprised by the seriousness in my tone. "What is it?" she asked, her face a mix of curiosity and slight annoyance. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "I need to know the truth," I said, locking eyes with her. "Are you seeing someone else?" Her reaction was immediate. Her eyes widened, and she looked at me like I had just accused her of a crime. "What? No. What are you talking about?" she exclaimed, her voice rising defensively. But I wasn't backing down. I couldn't. "Don't lie to me, Wendy," I said, my voice firmer now. "I've seen the way you've been acting. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way you've been pulling away from me. I followed you the other day. I saw you with that man." The room fell silent. She stared at me, her face pale, her mouth slightly open, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Then she shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "You're paranoid," she said, her tone icy. "You're imagining things, Brittany. He's just a colleague. We were discussing work. How could you even think I'd do something like that?" But I could see it, the flicker of something in her eyes, the way she avoided looking directly at me. It wasn't just anger or frustration, it was fear. She was hiding something, and we both knew it. "Just a colleague?" I asked, my voice low, almost a whisper. "Then why have you been acting like this? Why do you keep secrets from me? We used to tell each other everything, Wendy. What changed?" She stood up, as if she needed to create distance between us. "Nothing changed, Brittany. You're the one who's changed. You're the one who's suddenly suspicious and accusing me of things that aren't true." I stood up too. unable to sit still with the intensity of my emotions. Because I don't feel like I know you anymore. You're not the same person I married, Wendy. I don't know who you are anymore, and it's tearing me apart. She turned away, crossing her arms defensively. You're being ridiculous, she muttered, but there was no conviction in her voice. She sounded scared, unsure. I couldn't hold back the tears that had been building up. Do you have any idea what this is doing to me? I asked, my voice breaking. I've been going crazy, Wendy, trying to figure out what's going on. I don't want to believe that you're capable of betraying me, but you're not giving me any reason to trust you. There was a long, painful silence. I could see her struggling, her mind racing as she tried to decide what to say next. Finally, she turned back to me, her eyes glistening with tears. Brittany, I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice so soft I could barely hear it. My heart dropped. This wasn't a denial, it was an admission, wrapped in apology and regret. I felt like the ground had just fallen out from under me. Sorry for what? I asked, though deep down, I already knew the answer. She looked away again, unable to meet my gaze. I didn't mean for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Her words hung in the air, and I felt my world shatter into a million pieces. The truth was out, and there was no taking it back. Wendy had betrayed me, and nothing would ever be the same again. After that night, everything felt different. The air in our home was thick with unspoken words, and every glance between us carried the weight of what had been revealed. Wendy's confession, though not fully detailed, was enough to destroy the foundation of trust we had built over years. I was devastated, but I wasn't ready to confront the full reality of what this meant for us. At least, not yet. For days, I walked around in a daze, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. I kept replaying our conversations, our arguments, and that moment when she finally broke down and admitted that something had happened. But it wasn't just about what she did. It was about everything that led up to it. The lies, the distance, the betrayal of the life we had promised each other. I wanted answers. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went, how long it had been going on, and whether there was any chance of saving what was left of our marriage. But every time I tried to talk to her about it, she shut down, retreating into herself, as if admitting to anything more would make it all too real. It was like she was living in denial, hoping that if she didn't say it out loud, it would somehow disappear. But I couldn't live in denial. The pain of not knowing was worse than the pain of the truth, and I was determined to get the answers I needed, no matter how much it hurt. One evening, after another day of cold silence between us, I finally broke. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know everything, no matter the cost. Wendy, I said, my voice trembling as I tried to keep my emotions in check. I can't do this anymore. I can't keep living in the dark, wondering what really happened. I need you to tell me the truth, the whole truth. I deserve that much. She looked at me, her eyes filled with fear and sadness. For a moment, I thought she might refuse, that she'd shut me out again, like she had so many times before. But then she nodded, her shoulders slumping, as if the weight of her guilt was finally too much to bear. I'll tell you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But please, Brittany, you have to understand. I never meant for it to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. Just tell me, I said, steeling myself for what was to come. And so she did. She told me how it started, how she met him at work, how he made her feel valued and appreciated in ways that she hadn't felt in a long time. She told me how it began as just a friendship, a connection that grew stronger over time until one day it crossed the line. It was a mistake, she said, her voice breaking as she struggled to hold back tears. I know that now. I knew it then too, but I was weak, I was lonely, and I let myself do something I'll regret for the rest of my life. As she spoke, I felt my heart shatter all over again. Every word was like a knife twisting in my gut, each revelation a blow to the person I thought I was, to the life I thought we had. She kept talking, confessing everything, how long it had been going on, how many times they had been together, how she had lied to me again and again to cover her tracks. By the time she was done, I felt like I was drowning in a sea of betrayal and pain. The woman I loved, the woman I had shared my life with, had been living a lie right under my nose. And now that the truth was out, there was no going back. The illusion of our perfect life was shattered beyond repair. But what hit me the hardest was when she told me why she did it. It wasn't just about the attention or the thrill of something new. It was about something deeper, something that cut straight to the core of who I was. I felt like I wasn't enough, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Like I was losing myself. Like I wasn't the person you fell in love with anymore. I thought maybe he could fill that void, make me feel whole again. But I was wrong, Brittany. I was so wrong. Those words, more than anything else, broke me, because they weren't just an admission of her guilt. They were a reflection of everything I had feared but never wanted to acknowledge. That maybe, despite everything we had built together, despite all the love and trust and history, I wasn't enough for her anymore. That maybe deep down, she had been searching for something I couldn't give her. I sat there in silence, feeling the weight of her words crush me. The room was spinning, and I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. All I could think about was how everything I had believed in, everything I had trusted, had been a lie. And the worst part? I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know if there was any way to salvage what was left, or if this was the end. Wendy reached out to touch my hand, but I pulled away, the pain too raw, too overwhelming. I couldn't look at her, couldn't stand the sight of her, knowing what she had done. In the days that followed, I felt like a shell of the person I once was. The revelation of Wendy's betrayal left me reeling, and I couldn't escape the crushing weight of despair. I'd sit alone in the house, staring at nothing, my mind looping endlessly through everything she had told me, everything she had done. The life we had built together, the life I thought was solid, unshakable, now felt like a cruel joke. I started questioning everything. How had I missed the signs? Was I so blind, so wrapped up in my own world, that I didn't see my marriage falling apart right in front of me? I replayed every moment, every conversation, searching for clues, for something that would explain how we ended up here. But no matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't find a single answer that made sense. And then the self-doubt kicked in. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I wasn't enough for her, like she said. Maybe I wasn't the man she needed me to be. I began to wonder if I had failed her in some fundamental way, if I had been too focused on my own life, my own struggles, to see that she was slipping away from me. The more I thought about it, the more I blamed myself. The pain was unbearable, a constant ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I felt like I was drowning in it, like there was no escape. Every corner of the house reminded me of her, of us, of the life we had before everything went to hell. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. I'd lie awake at night, my mind racing with thoughts of what she had done, of how she had turned to someone else instead of coming to me. The worst part was the loneliness. I had always thought of Wendy as my partner, my confidant. She was the person I turned to when things got tough, the one who was always there for me. But now, in the wake of her betrayal, I felt more alone than I ever had in my life. The person I had loved, trusted, and relied on had become a stranger to me, and the emptiness that left behind was suffocating. I didn't know how to move forward. I didn't know if I even wanted to. The future, once so clear and bright, was now a dark, uncharted territory that I was terrified to navigate. I had always believed in loyalty, in the strength of our bond. But now, all I could see was the broken pieces of what we once had, scattered around me like shards of glass, too sharp and painful to touch. I spent hours, days, just sitting there, lost in my own thoughts, sinking deeper into despair. Every time I tried to pull myself out, to find some glimmer of hope, the reality of what had happened would drag me back down. The life I had known was gone, and I was left with nothing but the overwhelming sense of loss and the haunting question of what I was supposed to do next. As the days dragged on, the fog of despair slowly began to lift, leaving me with a stark, painful clarity. I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I had to make a decision, whether to stay with Wendy and try to rebuild the shattered remains of our marriage, or to walk away and start over, alone. It was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. On one hand, I loved her. Despite everything, despite the lies and the betrayal, a part of me still loved the woman I had spent so many years with. We had history, memories, a life together, and there was a time when I couldn't imagine a future without her. But that was before everything changed, before the trust between us was broken beyond repair. On the other hand, I was angry and hurt in a way that felt like it would never heal. How could I stay with someone who had betrayed me so completely? How could I ever trust her again? Every time I looked at her, all I could see was the pain she had caused me, the way she had shattered the life we had built together. The thought of staying, of trying to rebuild, seemed impossible. How could we ever go back to the way things were? I tried to imagine what staying would look like. Endless conversations about the affair, constant reminders of what she had done, the daily struggle to rebuild trust that had been so completely destroyed. Could I forgive her? Could I live with the knowledge of her betrayal? Or would it haunt me every day for the rest of my life? But leaving wasn't any easier. The thought of walking away, of giving up on everything we had, was terrifying. I'd be starting over, alone, with nothing but the wreckage of our marriage to show for all those years. And then there was the fear of what life would be like without her, the fear of being alone, of never finding someone I could trust again. I turned to friends, family, anyone who would listen, desperate for advice, for some kind of clarity. Some told me to leave, to start fresh and find someone who would value and respect me. Others urged me to stay, to try and work things out, to give Wendy a chance to make things right. But in the end, no one could make the decision for me. It was my life, my marriage, and ultimately, my choice. I spent countless nights lying awake, weighing my options, trying to envision a future in both scenarios. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that neither path would be easy. Staying would mean facing the pain head-on, working through the betrayal and rebuilding trust from the ground up. It would be a long, difficult journey filled with doubt and uncertainty. But leaving would mean letting go of everything I had known, everything I had believed in. It would mean starting over completely on my own and facing a future that was terrifyingly uncertain. In the end, It came down to one simple question. What did I want for my future? Did I want to spend the rest of my life fighting to rebuild something that might never be whole again? Or did I want to take a leap into the unknown, to start fresh, even if it meant facing the fear and loneliness that would come with it? After days of soul-searching, I finally made my decision. I realized that I couldn't live with the constant reminders of what had happened, the endless struggle to rebuild something that might never be the same. I knew that staying would mean living in the shadow of her betrayal, and I couldn't do that to myself. So, I chose to leave. It was the hardest decision I've ever made, but deep down, I knew it was the right one. I needed to heal, to find myself again, and I couldn't do that while staying in a relationship that had caused me so much pain. It was time to let go, to move on, and to start rebuilding my life, one step at a time. After making the decision to leave, I felt a mix of emotions: relief, fear, sadness, and an overwhelming sense of uncertainty. I knew I had made the right choice for myself, but the reality of what that meant was daunting. I was stepping into a new chapter of my life, one that I hadn't anticipated, and I knew I couldn't do it alone. The first thing I did was reach out to those closest to me, friends and family who had been by my side through thick and thin. It wasn't easy to admit what had happened, to confess that my marriage had fallen apart, but I needed their support. I needed to know that I wasn't alone in this, that there were people who cared about me and would help me through the toughest days. The response was overwhelming. People I hadn't spoken to in months, even years, reached out to offer their support. They listened to me vent, cry, and express all the emotions I had been holding inside. They didn't judge me or tell me what I should have done differently. They were just there, solid, dependable, and exactly what I needed. I also decided to seek professional help. Therapy became a crucial part of my healing process. Talking to someone who could offer an objective perspective, who could help me process my emotions and understand the depth of my pain, was incredibly healing. My therapist helped me navigate the complex emotions of betrayal, loss, and the challenge of rebuilding my life from the ground up. With the support of my friends, family, and therapist, I began to take small steps toward rebuilding. I focused on the basics, taking care of myself, finding new routines, and slowly letting go of the past. I started doing things I had neglected during the turmoil of my marriage: exercising, pursuing hobbies, spending time with people who uplifted me. Each small step felt like a victory, a move toward reclaiming my life. There were days when it felt impossible, when the weight of what had happened threatened to pull me back into despair. But each time, I reminded myself of why I made the decision to leave, of the future I wanted to build for myself. And with the support of those around me, I kept moving forward. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick, but gradually, I began to feel like myself again, or maybe a new version of myself, one that was stronger and more resilient. I was learning to live without the constant pain and doubt, learning to trust myself again. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew I was heading in the right direction. As time passed and I began to heal, I found myself in a place I hadn't expected to be so soon, ready to meet someone new. It wasn't something I had planned or even actively sought out. In fact, the idea of opening my heart again after everything that had happened seemed almost impossible. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. I met Butch through a mutual friend. It was nothing special at first, just a casual introduction at a gathering. We exchanged pleasantries, talked about the usual things: work, hobbies, life in general. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was still so focused on rebuilding my own life that the idea of starting something new felt distant, almost out of reach. But there was something about Butch that stuck with me. He was easy to talk to, genuine in a way that I hadn't encountered in a long time. He didn't pry into my past or push me to share more than I was comfortable with. He just listened, laughed at my jokes, and made me feel at ease in a way I hadn't felt in months. We started seeing more of each other, always in group settings at first. There was no pressure, no expectations. It was just nice. Slowly, I began to look forward to those moments when our paths would cross. There was a warmth to Butch, a kindness that I found myself drawn to despite my initial hesitations. One evening, after another casual get-together, Butch asked if I wanted to grab a coffee, just the two of us. I hesitated for a moment, that familiar fear of getting hurt again rising in my chest. But something inside me said it was time, that I couldn't let fear hold me back forever. So, I agreed. That coffee turned into a long conversation that stretched late into the night. We talked about everything, our lives, our dreams, the things that had shaped us. I found myself opening up to him in ways I hadn't expected, sharing pieces of my story that I thought I'd locked away for good. And the more I shared, the more I realized that Butch wasn't just listening. He understood. There was no judgment in his eyes, no pity, just understanding and a quiet strength that made me feel safe. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could trust someone again. It was a strange feeling, both terrifying and exhilarating. But as the evening turned into night, I found myself smiling in a way I hadn't in a long time. It wasn't love at first sight, and it wasn't some grand, sweeping romance. It was simple, steady, and real. A new beginning. One that I wasn't sure I was ready for, but one that I knew I wanted to explore. Meeting Butch was the start of something new. Something that felt good, honest, and full of possibility. And after everything I had been through, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was ready for that. As Butch and I continued to see each other, something unexpected happened. I began to trust again. It wasn't easy, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. After what I'd been through with Wendy, the idea of trusting someone with my heart again felt like walking a tightrope without a safety net. But with Butch, things were different. He was patient, understanding, and never pushed me beyond what I was ready for. There were times when my old fears would resurface, moments of doubt, flashes of insecurity that made me question whether I could really do this. But each time, Butch was there, steady and reassuring. He didn't just tell me he was different. He showed me. He understood the scars I carried, and instead of trying to ignore them, he acknowledged them. He made it clear that he wasn't looking to replace anyone or erase my past. He simply wanted to build something new with me. One of the things that stood out most about Butch was his transparency. He was open with me about his life, his past, and his intentions. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas. If something bothered me or made me uneasy, he encouraged me to talk about it. He listened, really listened, and that made all the difference. I didn't have to guess with him or wonder what he was thinking. He made sure I knew where we stood, and that kind of honesty was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. As time went on, I found myself letting go of the walls I'd built around my heart. I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop, stopped expecting betrayal at every turn. I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this could be something real, something lasting. It wasn't just about falling in love again. It was about learning to trust that love could be true, that it could be something I could rely on. We took things slow, each of us careful not to rush into anything. But even in that slow pace, there was a depth to our connection that I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about the little things, the way Butch would remember something small I'd mentioned weeks ago, or how he'd make sure I was comfortable before anything else. It was in the consistency, the way he showed up for me, day after day, without fail. I started to realize that trust isn't about blind faith. It's about seeing someone's actions, their character, and knowing that you can count on them. With Butch, I didn't just hear promises. I saw them in the way he treated me, the way he handled our relationship with care and respect. And slowly, I began to trust that what we had was real. Falling in love with Butch was different than anything I'd experienced before. It was quieter, more grounded, but also more profound. It wasn't about being swept off my feet. It was about feeling secure, understood, and valued. It was about building something together, brick by brick, with each of us bringing our own strengths and vulnerabilities to the table. There were still challenges, of course. Rebuilding trust after everything I'd been through meant confronting my own fears and insecurities, learning to communicate openly and honestly about what I needed and what scared me. But with Butch, those conversations felt safe. I knew I could be honest with him, and that he would meet me with the same honesty in return. As the months went by, what started as a cautious friendship blossomed into something more, a deep, enduring love built on trust, respect, and a mutual understanding of what we both wanted in life. I found myself looking forward to our future together, not with fear or trepidation, but with hope and excitement. I learned that love isn't about erasing the past or pretending that pain doesn't exist. It's about finding someone who sees all of you, the good, the bad, and the broken, and loves you anyway. Butch did that for me, and in the process, he helped me rediscover my ability to love and trust again. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. Looking back now, it's hard to believe how far I've come. The pain, the betrayal, the doubt, they were all consuming at one point, and I thought I'd never find my way out of that darkness. But here I am, standing on the other side, with a sense of peace I never thought I'd feel again. The journey wasn't easy, and there were times when I didn't know if I'd make it through. But what I've learned is that happiness isn't about having a perfect life or avoiding pain. It's about accepting what's happened, learning from it, and finding a way to move forward. It's about realizing that life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes incredibly hard. But that doesn't mean it's not worth living. With Butch, I've found a new kind of happiness, one that's rooted in trust, understanding, and mutual respect. It's different from what I had before, and in many ways, it's better. We've built something strong together, something real, and I'm proud of the love we share. It's not about replacing what I lost, it's about embracing what I've gained. I've also learned to accept myself, the mistakes I've made, the scars I carry, the person I've become. I'm not the same person I was before everything happened, and that's okay. I'm stronger now, more resilient, and more aware of what I need and deserve in a relationship. I've learned that it's okay to set boundaries, to demand respect, and to prioritize my own well-being. And as for Wendy, I've made my peace with what happened. I've let go of the anger, the resentment, and the need for answers I'll never fully get. It doesn't mean I've forgotten, or that it doesn't still hurt sometimes, but I've accepted it as part of my story, a chapter that's now closed. In the end, I've found happiness not by trying to recreate the past, but by embracing the future. It's a future that's full of uncertainty, sure, but it's also full of hope, love, and endless possibilities. I'm excited to see where it takes me, and for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. This journey has taught me that life doesn't always go the way we plan, but that doesn't mean it can't still be beautiful. I've found love again, not just with Butch, but with myself, with the person I've grown into through all of this. And that more than anything is the happiness and acceptance I've been searching for all along.